As one of the Hasidic Rebbes once said, "Daf leben mit der Zeit," which in Yiddish and English translated means you have to live with the times. Being that the New York Times wasn't around then, he didn't mean the New York Times, but he meant living with the times was a cryptic statement, but his son later explained it to the Chassidim that it meant living with the Torah that's read during that time. Which is an odd way of putting it, because usually you want to know what's living with the times, you actually do have to read either the New York Times or some other newspaper, or internet service that gives you the news of today. If you open up a Bible, you don't get the news of what happened today. You hear about events that happened thousands of years ago. So even if those events are relevant and have a message and have inspiration and speak to us, but they're definitely not the news of our time. Today's news is different than yesterday's news. So to live with the times obviously requires deeper understanding, and that is also a deeper understanding of what the Torah is. Now, for many people, the Bible, the Torah at best, is a documentation of Jewish history. For some, it's a myth. For others, it's divinely inspired. And for many others, it's every word was said by God. But however your belief system, all the three that I've just mentioned, missing one critical component.
Do you love to travel? To experience that rush of a surprising, unprecedented discovery? If you love to travel, please join me on the ultimate journey, the 60-day journey, a spiritual guide to the high holidays that can help you discover new resources. So please join me as we travel on these 60 days.
Why would we be interested in reading about an Abraham who lived almost 4,000 years ago in an area called Mesopotamia, which is itself sounds so ancient, in the Mesopotamian valley of what we call southeastern Iraq today, modern-day southeastern Iraq, and about a journey that he took almost 4,000 years ago from a journey west toward Israel and ended up landing in Israel. Why is that relevant to us? There's so many issues we have to deal with. If you've gone to therapy today or yesterday, I'm sure you have issues that you were discussing, probably not about Abraham, more probably something more about a more immediate ancestor of yours, like a mother or a father. And then we have all kinds of stuff that we carry and challenges at work, at home, children. You're in a relationship, you're out of a relationship, you're looking for a relationship, you're in a bad one, a good one. I mean, there's a whole list of things. Then, of course, there's the economy. Tonight is the World Series, which begins around night now, just in case you needed a reminder. Some people told me they can't come here because of the World Series, so they're going to be watching me right near the game, and they'll see what's more exciting, So there's a lot of important things happening in the world. So why would we be sitting here, and it's not just here, Jews would be going to synagogue every Shabbos. And these are questions I had as a younger man. Still feel young, but I was younger once. And listen intently to the reading of the Torah. Every word was read in the synagogue, and if someone read it a little wrong, everybody would start yelling and saying, you have to read it differently, the whole thing. And I remember asking once my father or someone near me, I said, who cares if they read it this way, read it that way? Oh, you don't understand, you get older, you'll understand. And I got older and I understood that they don't understand. And that's what they were told. So I started wondering, okay, so what's going on here? Like, what is this, some type of mass mind control program? So you can imagine, I had a little skepticism in me, let's put it mildly. And I still have it. And I was saying, so this is people who believe that the Torah is absolutely divine. If it's so divine, like why doesn't it address the challenges of our personal lives? Like where exactly will you find about how to deal with your abusive mother, or how to deal with psychological issues around finding love in your life, and all the things that people find that are contemporary challenges. And if you go with a school of thought that the Torah is divinely inspired or basically myth and the collective story of human beings searching for faith or God, as some put it, then obviously with that approach, and then it's one book among many books, and it's nice, doesn't have to have that type of relevance. And I came to discover that all of these different approaches are simply inadequate. Unless there's something in the story that is more relevant to us here today than even the news and the things that are happening physically in our lives today, then is it really worth pursuing and following and trying to understand what the Torah has to say? Now, I know this may sound sacrilegious to some, but the fact is, this is, I've discovered, is the ultimate question. Who cares what happened to Abraham? It's not just a given to say, oh, the Jews left Egypt and therefore we should care. Yeah, I understand it may have nostalgic value and may tell us about our ancestors and may even have some inspirational lessons. And what I discovered, which was for me absolute epiphany and revolutionary, was that the Torah that we read is not even really the Torah. What we're reading are cryptic notes that are just speaking in the language of man. Basically metaphor. Not that the events didn't happen, but this real story, as the Shalah puts it, a great mystic, middle-aged mystic of the 16th, 17th century, and the Rameh of Pana and other great mystics, they use listen to this expression and tell me how radical it sounds. They say the Torah, people think, talks about things down here and alludes to things up there, which means talks about material, physical events that happened, the flood, Genesis, Adam and Eve, Abraham, Egypt, this, that, and it alludes to some deeper messages. They say that's not accurate. This is the words of the Shalah. The Torah is medaberes be'elyenim u'meramezes betachtenim. It speaks about things up there, and it alludes to things down here. So I remember the first time I heard that, I said, wow, 1 second. Is this like traditional Judaism? Who knows this? When was the last time you heard that in Hebrew school or in yeshiva? Talks about things up there. That means the whole Torah is really a spiritual book, talking about spiritual ideas, that at some point in history happened to manifest itself in physical personalities and episodes and events and geographical locations that the Torah documents. But its story is a spiritual story. And when I heard that and then began to pursue it, I said, yeah, that, of course, it's so obvious. Because when you read the Torah, if it's a historical document, it's sure missing a lot. We begin the story of Abraham when he's 75 years old. Now, who would write a story that would start someone that's 75 years old? And you continue to read, you'll see complete gaps from a historical point of view. You start wondering why they're focusing some episodes are talked about endlessly. Other most important things are just hinted to in a line. I mean, it doesn't have any logic to it. But as soon as you open up a spiritual explanation of it, the whole thing becomes literally a blueprint. So Abraham was a human being that lived, yes, on earth almost 4,000 years ago. But you want to know something? Abraham lived before that. Abraham, as the mystics say, this comes from the expression from the Sefer HaBoher. It's one of the classic texts of Kabbalah. Actually, from a similar time of the Zohar. It actually means the same thing. Zohar means illumination. Zohar means brilliance, light, splendor. And Sefer HaBoher, Boher also means, in a different word, Bahirus, also light, splendor. The Sefer Boher says this cryptic expression, which I'll explain. It's a mystical expression. It says that until Abraham was born, Chesed of Atzilus, I'll explain in a minute what that means, had a job to do. As soon as Abraham was born, it says Chesed no longer had a job to do, and it said, what should I do now? What is Chesed of Atzilus? Let me explain. It's a dimension, a spiritual dimension, that is part of what the Kabbalists call the DNA and the building blocks of existence. Now, today we know that it's not what you look in the mirror is that what makes up your personality and your physical physiology. It's the DNA. It's genetic. It's actually invisible to the naked eye. It's microscopic elements that shape a human being, whether you'll be a male or female, or the personality of each individual in their particular way. The same is true not just for human beings. We know today that subatomic particles shape atoms, which in turn shape molecules, which in turn shape the elements that make up everything that exists. So as opposed to perhaps a few hundred years ago where we thought everything was looked upon from the outside in, you looked at the universe, you thought something was powerful, it was large, Today that we know it's the exact opposite. Everything works from the inside out. There are microscopic forces that shape all of existence. You will never and I will never see those microscopic forces. The energy that shapes matter. Today this is common knowledge that energy equals matter or E equals mc squared. But it wasn't always common knowledge. So the mystics take it one step further and they say behind the subatomic particles and behind the DNA lie spiritual particles. And they also shape reality. And that's where it all begins. First it begins on the spiritual, then it manifests in the material. Just to use an example, a simple example to make it a little more palatable. When you see a person cry, you see tears come out of the person's eyes, you don't say, oh, first you have tears and then you feel sad. First we have sadness within our hearts, within our beings, and then they well up and they to the point that they erupt, so to speak, and they affect our tear ducts, and for some reason it produces tears which come out of the eyes. So you see a smile on a person's face. So it's not first you smile and then you're happy. Because you're happy, for some reason it turns into a contortion on the face that looks like a smile. So when I look at you, I have to travel from the outside in. I look at the smile, I say, oh, he must be smiling because they're happy. Or maybe it's a fake smile. But bottom line is, we have to look from the outside in. You see tears, that person may be sad. But when you look at yourself, you don't need to look in the mirror to know what kind of mood you're in. It works from the inside out. So it's natural to understand the universe that first you look at what is the force that shaped the tears. So you can say the tear is the body, and what is the soul of a tear? Sadness. So the mystics just take it a step further, and they say when it rains outside, as it did today, so some people take an umbrella or a raincoat. If you like weather reports or the Weather Channel, you study the meteorological patterns and air pressure systems and highs and lows and so on. And the mystics would say it's no different than tears. Just like the human tear cleanses. One of the expressions in the Kabbalah is that the tear is like it bathes the soul. So the same thing is maybe raindrops. Just like they have subatomic particles, also have spiritual particles. Maybe it's angels crying over the state of this world. And they're cleansing the world through a few tears. Obviously, angels not physically crying. It means it begins, let's call it on a archetypal level, a concept, an energy, and that energy manifests in a physical form. This is essentially, in a nutshell, all mystical thinking is based on that concept. Not that the universe begins on a physical level, and then we try to figure out what's inside. It begins on an inside level, and then it manifested on the outside. And if you think about it, it makes complete sense. It's not your personality that shapes your DNA. It's your DNA that shapes your personality. So it's your soul where it all begins, and it's the components that define the spiritual DNA and building blocks of existence that ultimately manifest, and here's the world we see. Now it's hard to think this way because we're so accustomed to measuring reality based on our sensory tools, so we give so much credence to the outside of things, but the fact is our minds, when you think about it, what is the most significant part of a human being is the inside, not the outside. As much as we worship the superficial, and even though everyone says don't judge a book by its cover, everyone does, the fact is we all understand, and none of us would like to be judged by our cover. We'd like to know that I have a personality inside, and I'm complex. And if you see something, there's more to it than that meets the eye, etc., etc. So so going back to the Torah, that's exactly the way the Torah was really read by people who knew how to read it. They didn't read it from the outside in. Abraham, it's like the Sefer HaBorah says, Abraham is chesed, the incarnation of chesed. Chesed is an energy, the energy of love. Abraham embodied love on this earth. So that's why the Sefer HaBorah says that chesed, that energy says, once Abraham was born, no one needs me anymore because he's replacing me on this earth. So essentially, every character in the Torah is another spiritual archetype that we have within us. So we have a chesed within our soul, like the DNA, and we have a Gvura, and we have an Abraham and an Isaac and a Jacob, and a Moses and an Aaron and a Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, and Adam and Eve, and the Garden of Eden and a serpent. Every character in the Torah, and every episode, and every event is happening right now inside your soul. And when you read it properly, it's really the story of your life. When I discovered that, I said, I can understand why Jews died for this Torah. You know, the stories go, and these are not just stories, they're true, and they're people witnesses, that when, God forbid, anti-Semites, or even during the Holocaust, they would burn down a synagogue. So you saw Jews running into the synagogue, not to save a child, not to save their mother or father, not to save a human being, to save a Torah scroll. You see them running to the point of putting themselves in danger. You think, what's so significant about a Torah scroll? You know, there are 1,000 other Torah scrolls in the world. You could always write a new one. Not like a life. But then when you read, as we say in the evening prayer, Torah is chayenu v'erech yamenu. The Torah is our life and our sustenance. It is a life. It's not a scroll. It's not a book. It was never seen as a book. It was seen as a blueprint for life. And that's more than just a book. And that's worth saving. So they were ready to risk their lives. And not just physically save a Torah, but risk their lives not to disgrace the Torah. Not to forsake it. Because it wasn't for them a book. It wasn't a history book. It wasn't even a book of poetry and inspiration. It was literally a source of life and sustenance. Because in it they found the secrets of existence. The fact that we can't read it that way is due to the failure of our school systems. And this is not my words. It's not like I came up with this in the 21st century or the 20th century when I was born. But this is documented. As I said, the Shalah writes it. And he has sources that go back before him. The Torah talks to things above and hints to things below. So we read the things below in the language of below, meaning in the what we call anthropomorphic language. So God saw, God got angry, God heard, God spoke. Is that what exactly did God say? I mean, did God speak like we speak? So there are commentaries that all discuss what did Abraham see when he says he saw God? What did Moses see? What did the Jews see when they saw God, so to speak? So if you think of it in a juvenile way, you think, oh yeah, it must say son says God with a long white beard on a throne in heaven, who's striking us with lightning when we misbehave. That's the fairy tale image. But if you begin to be a little more sophisticated and think about it, maybe the Torah is just speaking in metaphor. Saw. They experienced it as if you would see something. What does seeing mean? Seeing means that it's so real as if you see it. You can experience something. It doesn't necessarily mean you see a physical thing. Something is so real to you that you experience it as if you saw it. I'm not going to go through the whole language now of the Torah since we're focusing on this one chapter. It was by means of an introduction, which I think is vital. Because it really, as I said, for me, and I gather for anybody that has either exposure or no exposure, changes the whole picture. That's a Torah worth fighting for. That's a Torah worth teaching and worth listening to, because it's about our lives. It can answer the dilemmas that we are struggling with today, which is why that Rebbe said, living with the times. Yes, you can read the news today, but you could also not read it and it won't make a difference, frankly. You'll be a little less informed, a little more informed. Yeah, maybe some news can also help you make some money. But change your life? Help you deal with your relationships? Yeah, I'd like to see which piece of news lately has helped you deal with your relationship. Maybe it makes things worse, actually. Because you see others are also doing the same thing. Whereas, when he says live with the times, you want to live with your struggles today and want to find answers, open up a Torah and read the inside story, not the outside story. So let's do that, exactly that, and you'll see this is not forced in this week's chapter. So tonight's class was titled Getting Out of Your Comfort Zone, or the secret to all growth. So it happens to be one of my favorite chapters because I love talking about comfort zones or getting out of them. It's a great topic. And also about dysfunctionality. That's also a great topic. And also about all my so-called orthodox bashing, which you've sensed a little here too, which I also like to do. So this is my personal vices. I have more, but those I'll share with you now. And therefore I have, thank God, the opportunity to sit here and pontificate. But hopefully it's also be helpful to you too, besides me getting it off my chest. You get what I'm saying. So, comfort zones. In Arizona, they've developed a lot of these retirement villages. And they have names like that, like Comfort Zone, Arizona, what's the other one called? Animal Bliss, Arizona, not Animal, I'm just kidding. There's names like that, really, that's the names of towns. Anyone remember any? They're very interesting names. They're all named like that, like they sound like a retirement village. This is the place to come to Like what? Sunset Village, the sunset of your life. It's a marketing related. Places like New York City or other even names came much more from the gutter. Basically, it was York, and this is New York, etc., etc. But there are cities that named. Now, there's one special one. It's not Comfort Zone. It's almost like that. Maybe like Pleasantville or something. Paradise or something. Yeah. But interesting. I would have named one Comfort Zone because I remember I went once for a weekend. It was hardly a comfort zone, but I went for a weekend with a good friend of mine to a Shabbaton. This was like a summer camp place. Now, I was in the summer camp for 30 years, so I couldn't believe the beds we used to sleep on, these bunk beds, with the broken springs, mattresses of plastic that fold in on you when if there's a spring missing. But there was one house called Comfort Zone. And the guy I was with, I said, so you want to join the Comfort Zone? So how many of you, do any of you have comfort zones? Nobody, huh? Okay. Yeah, I knew there were some exceptions to the rule. I guess they're all here. So it's an interesting topic, a comfort zone, because on one hand, we all know we're not going to just say, listen, I love my comfort zone because it doesn't sound so good. But on the other hand, we do love them. Some of us, I remember, I'm not going to say his name, but he used to come to this class, and he lived in California. And he was in music publishing, and he was a swinger, let's put it that way. He was enjoying his life. And I was once visiting California, so he asked, he offered me to stay at his place for that night. So after I had an engagement that evening, a speaking engagement, so I came like maybe 11:30 at night to his house. He said, there'll be the key outside, and you just let yourself in. It was in Bel Air, California, beautiful mansion. I come in. He's really everything ready for me, but I hear he's awake. So he says, hey, come upstairs. So I come up, and he's lying there in his bed by himself. And I burst out laughing when I walked in. And I said, you're never going anywhere, Because he had this big bed, and one of these massive, beyond king size. And he had these cashmere pillows and scarves and pillows and this, 80-inch television. And he was lying there in such comfort zone. And I said, you're never going to get married. You don't have any room here for anybody. He says, no, I have room. I said, I don't mean that. I said, you have all your teddy bears. They are surrounding you, You made your life very comfortable. And, he understood, so he laughed as well. And he said, but that's nothing. Come in the morning and wait till you see. So he had, in the morning, he pressed a button, and his bed literally went up became a chute, and right into a swimming pool. Without any effort. So you get some ideas how to retire. And I tell you, it was a comedy, but it was also a tragedy. This was I saw a comfort zone called par excellence, and thank God, some things happened in his life that got him out of that zone. And today he's married with a child, and as I said, I don't want to give it away because I don't want him to feel insulted, even though I've told the story and I've asked his permission. So don't think if you tell me your story, I'm going to expose it unless you give me written permission. So we all have our little comfort zones. I include myself as well. And I'm not by no means suggesting that being comfortable is a bad thing. People should be comfortable, and people should be blessed with comfort. In Hebrew, there's a word for it. It's called menuchas hanefesh, menuchas haguf, to be at peace with yourself, to be comfortable. But there's comfort in this comfort, as we shall discuss. And as I said, the opening verse, which as we'll see, is a statement that the first commandment to the first Jew is the following words. Lech lecha ma'artzecha u'meladetecha mebeis avicha ela eretz asher ereka. God says to Abraham, he's 75 years old, mind you, leave Artzecha, your land, Meladecha, the place of your birth, the home of your parents, and go to the land that I will show you. And with this begins literally the biggest journey of all history. Because Abraham's journey would give birth to Judaism, which would later give birth to Christianity and Islam, and to essentially spirituality of till this very day. So it wasn't just one small step for mankind. It was changed the whole trajectory of history, this small commandment. Had Abraham not listened, or had he not been told, we would not be here to talk about it, and the world would be a completely different world. So it's interesting to know the point of departure. But it's like very bizarre in a way. What kind of opening is that? It's not like he didn't tell him. God could have told Abraham, live a life of virtue. Commit to a life of mitzvahs and helping others. Not a life driven by self-interest and so on. I mean, there are many ways to so-called launch a new path of faith. You know, Abraham rejected the paganism of his time. So he was clearly traveling toward a greater transcendental type of approach to life than just one driven by self-interest and narcissism. So why is this so significant? Even if God told us to him, why do we open the chapter? This is the chapter that opens up this whole story really of the rest of the Torah. Till here it's preliminaries. You talk about Adam and Eve, the Garden of Eden, the flood. But Abraham really begins the story that Abraham then would go to Israel, promised land. Abraham would give birth to his children, and then the next generation, until we finally get to the Jews in Egypt, Moses. I mean, this is really where it all begins. So why does it begin with almost like a incidental event about God tells Abraham how to travel? And as you'll see in a moment, that this commandment or this statement is the beginning of all our journeys, everyone. And this is happening not just 3,700 years ago. This is happening right now, this week. The energy of Lech Lecha, each of us here, is being told the same thing. And it's the secret to all growth, as I said. And it's all about getting out of your comfort zone. But you'll see how valuable it is and how critical it is. It's not just optional. And that's why it's so emphasized. The Arizal, the great Arizal, the 15th, 16th century Kabbalist, some say the greatest of all Kabbalists, writes that with Lech Lecha began Sinai. This is the beginning of Sinai. That Sinai could not have happened. God would not have given the Torah at Sinai to the Jewish people had Lech Lecha not happened. Lech Lecha was the beginning of the Sinai experience, even though it's 1,000 years earlier. So what is really the significance of this statement? So the significance is very clear. If you start analyzing the verse, you'll see immediately there's something weird with the entire verse. You ever give anybody directions to go somewhere? I know men don't ask for directions, but so how do you give somebody directions? I have a theory about that too, but we'll discuss it another time. How do you give somebody directions? You tell them how to get to the destination they have to get. So, of course, you begin with the point of departure. You say, okay, you're here right now. I'll say you map it out in Google Maps. But then you have to say the destination exact address. And now here's the way to go. You focus on the destination because everybody knows the point of departure. You want to know where I have to go to. And here God does the exact opposite. When it comes to the departure, to the destination, God is very vague. Go to the land that I will show you. Where is it? East, west, south, north? No clue. When it comes to the departure, God doesn't just say leave your house or leave your address. It says leave your homeland, leave the first place of your birth, and leave the home of your parents. Frankly, it's redundant. I mean, they may not be exactly the same. Of course, you can find distinctions. You know, you can live in a city, and the home of your parents can be across the street or a few blocks away. But what's the need to emphasize all these three things? And when it comes to the destination, being absolutely vague. So clearly, there's something going on here that more than meets the eye. This forces us to dig deeper. So just to go back to what I said earlier, just as an aside for those that have grown up in yeshiva experience. So you read the commentaries, Rashi and the Ramban and others will tell you all kinds of explanations try to explain this discrepancy. But even if you know all those explanations, what's maybe missing is the relevance, personal relevance, and you'll see in a moment the relevance. God was telling Abraham, he wasn't just telling him some direction how to get from southern Iraq to Israel. Because he could have told him, you go northeast and that's it. What do you got to go into all these details? You're here. Go up, follow the river, which is the Euphrates River, Har Pros, and then make a left when you hit whatever, and continue. I mean, there are ways, there are signposts, there were rivers, there were mountains, there were valleys. It's very easy to describe. You see, the Torah doesn't have a problem describing geography later. You have very clear delineation of boundaries and other areas within Israel or outside of Israel that the Torah describes by either the mountains or the valleys or the rivers, the River Jordan. I mean, there are many ways. And here, completely in some cryptic terms. So the answer is, and this is where the Torah speaks about things above and hints to things below. Very clear. God is telling Abraham the secret for him and for his children till this day of how you make a move in your life. We talk about making a move. How do you get out of one place and get to another? And we're not just talking about a physical move. Physical move, we all know. You pick yourself up and you walk. Or if it's a far destination, you take a taxi or a car. If it's even far, you take an airplane. I mean, we all have ways to physically move around. But how do you get out of a stuck place, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually? Basically, the journey always begins with a move. And you'll see here, basically God is telling us the secret of how you make a move. It's not so much as they try to tell you, focus on your destination. You hear that often in business terms. They say, business goals, define your goals. It's true, you need to define your goals, obviously, because you're not going to get there if you don't know what they are. But even more importantly, what are the traps that hold you from getting there? How often do we get inspired and we even set out on a journey to get away from where we are, and you just end up getting stuck again? How many of us have, for instance, tried to find a healthy relationship and got burned? And then you said, you know what, I learned now for the experience, next time I won't do the same thing. And then only to find out that maybe a different name, different address, a different year, but it's essentially the same story all over again. What's happening here? What's happening here is not that you're insane, and not that there's something, even though some of us may think we are, and it's not that your intentions are bad. That's what's going on. You got commitment issues? Anybody has commitment issues here? Any women have commitment issues? See, nobody raises their hands. No comfort zones, no commitment issues. You have a perfect... Listen, we're discussing all this in order how to help others, right? That's the bottom line. This is a leadership seminar. That story, one guy came to the Rebbe Marash, and he says to him, I have a friend that really did something really terrible. He's ashamed to come to you, so he asked me to come and look for a way to correct it, to repair it, a tikkun, a way to repair it. So the Rebbe said to him, well, why did your friend have to expose himself to you? He could have come to me and said he has a friend. It's the method of how to sometimes get help in case... So the story, as I said, of Lech Lecha is to answer this question that I just asked. Why is it then that we have this inspiration, the motivation, many good reasons to get out of where we are? This can be anything: a bad job, a bad relationship, a bad home, a bad environment. You want to go, you want to move, you want to travel. Especially psychologically, you want to change your mindset. Why is it that so often you really are motivated, you've been burned, so it's not like you don't have the experience, and still you just don't get there? What's going on? Is it your intentions are not pure? Are you really deceiving yourself? What's really going on? It's very simple what's going on. Even if your intentions are absolutely pure, and as I said, you're not insane, what's happening is simply this. Think of it physically. You're locked in a house, let's say, tied by ball and chain to a pillar. But it's a long chain. And you look out the window and you see, wow, there's so much freedom out there. I want to go there. And you really mean it. So you really want that freedom. You've been locked here for so long. So you start moving, and of course the chain allows you to go a certain distance. And as much as you see like a child looking through a glass of a candy store. You can't get there because the chain is still holding you. So it doesn't question your intentions. It doesn't even question your destination. The problem is you have a destination, you have a goal, you may know exactly what you want. The problem is you have a past that haunts you that you haven't freed yourself from. So that's what God tells Abraham. The destination, let's not worry about right now. I will show you who you really are. We'll soon get to that. The key thing is to get away from your past, because it's your past that's going to trap you from whatever you dream. And that past breaks down into 3 different types of comfort zones. These comfort zones are what trap us all. You could use another word for comfort zone, we use the word subjectivity. 3 forms of subjectivity. 3 types of blind spots that trap you, no different than a ball and chain that doesn't let you make a move or make a serious move in your life. And these 3 forms are described in these 3 terms, Ma'atzecha, Maladetecha, and Beis Avicha. The first is natural subjectivity that we all have. The first, and that is self-love. Human beings have self-love. You don't see mistakes or flaws within yourself as you see it in others. Kol ha-negoyim adam reya, it says, a person sees all the flaws except the negoy atzmi, his own, or her own. Sometimes you'll look at someone else and criticize them, and you may have much worse of the same thing that you criticize. And you may even know it. That's how blind it is. You minimize it when it comes to yourself. It's called subjectivity. It's called bias. It's not even necessarily evil, especially if you're aware of it. It's just a reality. This is the reason that any honest judge will recuse himself if he has interest in the case. It's full disclosure. I'm talking about an honest person. Why? Because whether you like it or not, if you're invested in the company, or it's a brother or sister, even if you don't like them, the fact is, flesh and blood, you are biased. And you can't be honest and objective. The great Moses, a man of God, recused himself from judging certain things because it was his own brother and sister. So everybody is biased. Anyone that says they're not is the biggest bias of all. They're lying to themselves and to others. In the words of the Torah, Hasheichid ya'aver einei chachamim u'mesalav divrei tzadikim. Listen to these words. This is one of the beauty of Torah. You'll see its bluntness, even against its own. It doesn't mince any words. Sheichid, which means literally bribery or bias. Ya'aver einei chachamim, blinds the eyes of the wise, and mesalav divrei tzadikim, and it distorts the tongue of the tzadikim, of righteous people. So you could ask the question, if someone's eyes are blinded because of bribe or because of bias, or his words are distorted, why do you call him a tzaddik and a chacham and a tzaddik? You shouldn't be called a chacham and a tzaddik. A wise person and a tzaddik? Because the Torah is saying you can be a chacham, even the Torah calls you a chacham. You can be the wisest person. You can be the greatest tzaddik. You're not immune from bias. As I said, even the great Moses. You're not immune because we're human beings, and we're naturally born with artzecha. Artzecha means self-love. So the first thing God says to Abraham, you must be aware of this. He's not telling him you can annihilate it. The fact is everyone remains, but if you're aware of it and you acknowledge it, that's the first step to freedom. Because you don't convince yourself, like the blind, being blinded, that you're really right. You say, you know something, I may be subjective here. That's the first statement of a true, honest person. And that's the first step of emancipation. That's what human beings are capable of doing. We may not like to do it. We like to cover up our flaws. We like to, one lie brings the next lie. But growth, if you want growth, and you need to be accountable. And you need to be honest. And even on a very selfish level. You know who told this to me the other day? An accountant told me. He says, most businesses fail, in my experience, he's like an older guy, was because the owners don't want to acknowledge the mistakes they made. They don't want to hear at the end of the year from the accountant. They say, I don't want to, they want you to tell them a good report, even if it isn't. And it's like so strange. It's about their losses. It's about making amends that they could next year make more money and not make such losses. But to hear your own flaws can be more powerful than your own success even. That means we become our own worst enemy. And this is not like some rare instance. It happens all the time. Because the blindness of something can ultimately destroy yourself, destroy your family. How many parents have hurt their children? How many brothers and sisters don't talk to each other because of money or some other thing? You think about it objectively, it doesn't make any sense. Everyone, you're not going to live forever. The only thing you have is your family and your brothers and sisters. And money, which doesn't go with you to heaven, is going to be more powerful because we get blinded. And when we get blinded, insane things actually do happen. And no one is immune from it. So the first thing God tells Abraham very bluntly, you want to grow and become a great man, the first thing you must know is you have to leave behind your biases, and you do that by acknowledging them. The second comfort zone, the second subjectivity, is Besavicha, the attitudes and influences of our parents. For good or for bad, we are shaped in our formative years by our parents. From the second you were born, and I'd go even earlier, from the moment of when you were conceived. And the Kabbalists say even earlier. But from that moment on, you've been affected by your parents, whether you like it or not. All of us have been, because we're vulnerable, fragile creatures. As some sages explain it with an analogy of a warm ball of wax. The younger you are, the warmer the wax. And every experience, every scar, makes an indelible image engraved in this warm wax. As the wax hardens, those engravings don't go away. Which is why the things that happen to us in our youngest years have the deepest impact on us. Psychology today is just beginning to acknowledge and come to that understanding. But read some psychology books if you're interested, of the 40s and even the 50s, 30s and 40s. You won't believe how children were looked at. They thought children were completely blind and oblivious of everything going on around them. It's like completely turned upside down. In Judaism and Torah, everything was the child. Because Torah always knew the child gets shaped from the moment they're conceived, from the moment we're born. So the next influences on you and all of us, besides our own self-love and self-interest, is parental influences. And if you want to discover yourself, you have to get away from that. You have to cut the umbilical cord more than once in your life. Now this doesn't mean, God forbid, abandoning or betraying or hurting your parents. It just means you have to become an adult on your own. And that doesn't come easy, because every time you have to get out of a comfort zone, it's uncomfortable. A child will always cry the first day it goes to school, and a child will often cry even later in life when you have to leave the camp, summer camp, or even later. Parents and children will cry when they make a certain type of separation. But anyone healthy knows it's necessary, because that's how you grow. Yes, we'd be much more comfortable, as one of the Rebbes once said to his in-laws in times in Russia. He was living in poverty with his new wife. So his in-laws, who had some money, said, why don't you live with us, same city, and we'll support you. You'll learn, you'll study, you'll do whatever you want. We're not going to tell you what to do. In those days, you didn't wire money. Either you lived in the town and they supported you, or you didn't. So this Rebbe wrote back to them. It's a very enticing offer. He wrote to his mother-in-law to come and live in comfort. But you have to know there's something even more enticing, which is living in your mother's womb. It's very comfortable. You don't have to struggle and go buy any food. You get everything healthy, everything you need. You're protected, completely protected for 9 months. So what's the problem? This Rebbe wrote to his mother-in-law. He said, the problem is the space has gotten too small and the child has gotten too large to stay there. So you can understand that this is true through our lifetimes. Of course, there's comforts are comforts, but not all comforts are healthy comforts. When they're there, when they're needed, the 9 months in pregnancy, it's necessary for a child to be there. God forbid a child does not have that, will not have the protection, will not have the necessity, resources and tools to grow into an adult in a hostile world. It would be very unhealthy for a child in the first years to be thrown out into the street. And unfortunately, we see what kind of damage it does. So our formative years, it's very healthy to be in the protection of nurturing and loving adults, parents. But then, the opposite happens. If that's overdone, then it's like a fruit that did not fall off a tree. There comes a point where, in a healthy human being, you slowly create you become your own. But how many decisions, I'm sure you've thought of this question, because I think about it, and I'm sure everybody thinks. How many decisions you make today and yesterday that you question, is it your decision or this is what your parents imposed upon you? And if you think you're rebelling against them, that also could be imposed. Some of us do what they want, and some of us do what they don't want. Just that's because we think we're ourselves then, but you're also reacting to them. How many attitudes that we have? How many stereotypes? I always ask myself this question. My father's now 4.5 years in heaven, but so many things I see myself that I saw in him. And of course there's my mother. You know? And many good, beautiful things too, don't get me wrong. I don't say there are some beautiful things, but then you start wondering, if everything was shaped when I was a little baby, and I look at babies around and I see how vulnerable they are, and everything is shaped by those around them, what decisions do you really make? I know it sounds like we're independent and free spirits and we're making all kinds of moves. But when it comes to the real decisions of how to love, and whether you have bouts of anger, where do you think an angry person learns to get angry? From your father or mother. That's where you learn to get angry. You see that they react that way. You find that they see it as, you begin to see it as a legitimate tool to react when people disturb you. That's what you copy. I'm talking about those things. I don't mean smaller. I mean the serious decision when it comes down to when you gravitate back to so-called your roots, to your natural self. When push comes to shove, as they say. B'kisei, b'kaisei, b'koisei. When it comes to our attitudes toward money, where do you think you learned your attitudes toward money? Whether you're stingy or you're giving, or controlling, or the opposite. You know, all the different things. We learn it from how our parents behaved. And since no parents are perfect, we have to be under their influence in some way or another. Now, the interesting thing is that even the positive influences of our parents are maybe positive, but that still doesn't give you independence. How many things are we doing that are positive that is just an extension of what was programmed inside of us? So God tells Abraham, you want to discover yourself, who you are, you have to get out of that shadow. Not just physically out of the parents' home, but out of their psychological shadow. You have to become yourself. You have to own what was given to you. Now, this doesn't mean that parents shouldn't give their children healthy values, a good education, standards. But there comes a point that a healthy parent also tells the child, now you are an adult. Now you have to learn to own those choices. I gave you the best I could, but now learn to own them. Now they're yours to make a decision. You have to, at some point, make a decision. Is this something you want or something you don't want? So can we truly free ourselves from those influences? No, completely not. But you can definitely look at them and say to yourself, one second, what these decisions I make, these attitudes, are they mine or are they given to me? And there's a statement we say in the prayer service. We say, Elokeinu ve'elokei avosenu. Say this in the Shemoneh Esrei and Amidah and many different prayers. Elokeinu ve'elokei avosenu. Our God and the God of our parents. So the question is asked, the order is, it seems should be reversed. First, God was the God of our parents before He became our God. So you say, Elokei avosenu ve'elokeinu. Yet the prayer says clearly, Elokeinu ve'elokei avosenu. Because the real God in your life is not what your parents gave you. It's the God that you ultimately discover. They may have taught you things, but it's not their God that you want. So we acknowledge that our ancestors give us a role model, gave us a description, our understanding, appreciation. But ultimately it's Elokeinu, and until it's not Elokeinu, your God, it's your God, it's the parents of your God, the God of your parents rather, it's not going to be completely integrated in your life. It'll become mechanical, by rote. You may do it out of guilt, shame, or other forces that we pick up as we're children. But to become yours, you want to become a true, free spirit, independent person, you're going to have to challenge it. And you're going to have to own it. And it doesn't always come comfortably. It's always easier to just say, oh, you know what? My parents did it, it must be great. I'm not suggesting that we have to mutineer and be rebellious. I am suggesting that you have to make it yours. And that's a much more complicated process. So yes, in other words, I'm trying to say is that religion is not about dogma and just accepting whatever anyone told you. It's about choices. There's nothing wrong with getting a good example and getting taught, as I said, standards and values. But to annihilate the individuality of the human spirit, basically, if you're just a clone of your parents, then it's not you. So God tells Abraham the second influence, comfort zone, subjectivity, and the influences and attitudes of your parents. Beis Avicha. And finally, the third one, is social pressure, peer pressure, our friends, our communities. Nobody wants to stand out. Nobody wants to be laughed at. Nobody wants to look different. Even though there's the concept of being, let's call, a pioneer and a bohemian, but even that is done within a certain style. If it's too crazy, the first line of Shulchan Aruch is the code of Jewish law says, "Al yevish mipnei hamaligim." Don't be ashamed of those that will mock or laugh. Abraham was laughed at because he was different. He made a choice. Everyone said, "You're going to do something that's not driven by self-interest." There's no such thing. Everyone's driven by self-interest. And Moses was mocked because true revolutionaries, true pioneers, true leaders are not conformists. So I'm not even going to ask this question. How many non-conformists are there in this room? I know no one has comfort zones. No one's got issues. What was the other thing? Commitment issues. It's all right. It's just we're in the same boat. So who's going to admit that they're a conformist? When's the last time you heard somebody say, "I'm a conformist"? No. Be interesting. Conformist.com. What's on that? Or you could open up a Facebook group called Conformists. The fact is, if nobody's a conformist, then what exactly is going on in this world? Then you wouldn't have any pioneers and leaders. You show me a true invention, true innovation, and I will show you somebody that was laughed at. There's no question about it. From the great Einstein to the Wright brothers, to anyone that came up with some crazy idea that people thought were insane. Now, that doesn't mean every insane idea is pioneering, mind you, so don't get any ideas here. But the point of the matter is that when you're crazy about something and you believe in it, and something inside of you tells you, even though it may not be rational, it doesn't make a difference what others say. I will tell you that I've seen in my own lifetime people in this room and others that I've met that would excel reach great heights if they would only get beyond one fear, the fear of others judging them, or the fear that they will be looked at as failures. Because I've seen people with unbelievable strength, but they don't have the courage, whatever reason it may be. If you really want to make complicated matters, maybe they don't have the courage because of their parental influences and their personal subjectivity. So there you have all three together in one big pot. But the bottom line is, they say this, even the feminist movement said that a lot of girls and women are shaped by their mothers who imposed upon them attitudes that women are certain second class, and that's where it came from. Not even the men. It was the women that do it to their own women. So what we impose our attitudes upon each other, the blind leading the blind, is the third level of subjectivity. And also comfort zone. It's comfortable to just do what everybody else is doing. And that is the third thing that God tells Abraham. The things that are, what did I say? The things that are most natural, the things that are the social and peer pressure, couple that with parental influences and with a natural subjectivity, you have yourself a good, nice load to deal with. So that's why God says to him, now, you want to go on a journey. You want to discover something real. You want to discover yourself? Who are you? How do we know that you are not a product of your own subjectivity, your parental influences, and the social community and that you live in, your environment? How do we know? So God says, leave all those three things, and go ela eretz asher areka. And listen to the verse. The way it's interpreted, it means, literally you can say it means to the land that I will show you. Meaning, show you the land. But it's really, if you read it, El Eretz Asher Ereka could also be interpreted, go to the land that I will show you who you are. Ereka doesn't refer to the land, it refers to you. The real you emerges when you get the clutter out of your life. That is why the first time you leave home, you go to school, or summer camp, or some other, go to college, or travel on a vacation, and suddenly you're with friends who are strangers, and there's a challenge, a crisis. You'll suddenly see strengths that you come out of you that you didn't even know you had. Because at home, you were never forced to access them. You were never challenged. All our greatest strengths come out when we are not under the shadow of those that protected us. And as I said earlier, everything has its time. I'm not suggesting that protection is unhealthy. In its time, it's very healthy. Let's put it this way. If a bird doesn't have a nest, it won't have the courage to fly outside of the nest. So we all have to begin a life, as I said, nurtured, protected, whether it's in the womb or afterwards. But as we develop and explore, and I can't resist but mentioning my granddaughter because I see her now every day. They're here for a while. And I watch her every morning, how she crawls around exploring boxes. I mean, it's like, I just love to see it because I'd love to be that way. Like every time you see a napkin fall out of a box, she gets like excited. You know, like, and then I say, we all did the same thing. You know, which child doesn't go, you find a box, and like just doesn't really care about that, just starts going and the place is a mess. So if you're like a real square adult, you say, hey, you're making a mess. If you're a person who understands what's going on, you say, what a beauty to see a child exploring, discovering this material universe. It's sad also because I don't want her to discover certain things, but what could you do? But it's fascinating. And then you say, this is who each of us were. That's how we behaved. We were once this type of free abandon, mischievous, if you wish, enchanted by every little thing. Everything was exciting. You have to go on any long exotic vacations or buy expensive gifts or turn on a television. As I said, a box with a few this morning, a box with some napkins was like more exciting to her than I've been excited for years in my life, from books that I've read. And so initially you say, oh, she's a child, a baby, doesn't understand. It's the exact opposite. For her, this is a novelty. I know, but a napkin by herself means nothing, you know. So my point is that there's a stage where we all need to be able to have that protection, but also to explore. And that's when you become an individual. So the balance of these two, of knowing when to have the comforts and when to go out, obviously is not easy to master. But to understand that we do need these two stages is very clear. Even now in our lives, don't get me wrong, just because we turn into adults does not mean we don't need nurturing, and we don't need comfort, and we don't need protection. It's just that you don't want one that is dominant over the other. We all need both of the forces in our lives. So what God was telling Abraham was not just some type of departure of the past. He was telling him how to free himself from those past forces. And then you know something? You can return to them, but you return to them as an independent individual, not as just someone that's shaped. I remember sitting in a house where the children were trembling when their father walked into the room, and I could not believe adult children in their 20s were trembling for this father, like he was some, wealthy, thought he was a big guy. Basically, he turned his children into his subjects, which of course is what every insecure person does. That's how you feel secure, when everybody around you is trembling. And I said to him before, he respected me to some extent, I guess not after what I said to him. So I said to him after everybody left, and I said to him, you know something? I never saw such an insecure person like you. You don't have the security to give your children the ability to be secure. And like he said, what? I made them so secure. Look, he started calling them in and say, show them how secure you are. That's not exactly what he did, but and if not, you know what? But this is not uncommon as well. This is what we do. Parents, unfortunately, have the power to project all their dysfunctionality on the next generation. But we have to know we're not victims of anybody. And God told that to Abraham. What I wanted to say earlier, which is equally fascinating, this is the negative. That everyone can understand. That I have to have the strength to be able to cut away and break away from the comfort zone of unhealthy environment. But the interesting thing is that even if it's a healthy environment, you still have to learn how to cut the umbilical cord. I'll just use an example from the Talmud. It's a fascinating example. It's a story of Rab Zera. Rab Zera was a great sage. And he had mastered, the Talmud says, the whole Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is not a small book to master. But being in his intellectual curiosity, and he wanted more, a person who's curious and is a knowledgeable person never comes to a plateau. You always want more. So the Talmud says that he wanted to study the Jerusalemite Talmud. You may be familiar, the Babylonian Talmud is the more famous one, but there's another academy that was in Jerusalem at the same time, or a little earlier, called the Talmud Yerushalmi. And it was a different method of study, different language. We have it today as well. It's much smaller than the Babylonian Talmud. And it was sealed, which means it was closed 100 years earlier. So we follow the Babylonian Talmud if there's a disagreement between the two. But nevertheless, the Jerusalem Talmud has many insights and has many profound approach that the Babylonian Talmud does not have. So the Talmud tells the following story. He fasted on 100 fasts. There are two opinions, 60 fasts or 100 fasts. Fasted. In order to forget the Babylonian Talmud, in order to be able to appreciate and learn the Jerusalem Talmud. It's a very strange story for two reasons. First of all, since when do you have to forget one body of knowledge to acquire another? Knowledge is accumulative. Whatever you learned yesterday can't disturb what you learned today, seemingly. You build on it. You learned yesterday, and today you learn more. Why do you have to forget what he learned yesterday or all his lifetime that he had mastered? It wasn't like he learned bad things. He was learning profound wisdom in order to acquire a new Talmud. And the second question, which is more of a halachic, legal question, is actually a commandment that says you're not allowed to actively do anything to forget what you studied. If you worked hard and you studied something, especially divine words, sacred words, it's considered to be a desecration to do something to forget it. It's one thing you forget it naturally because of age or because of time passes, but to go ahead and actively fast in order to forget. So one of the brilliant answers given for this is that he didn't want to forget what he had studied, the knowledge. He wanted to forget the approach. There's a methodology that we each have in our minds. They say, some psychologists say that at age 7, at age 8, you've already developed the way you will process information. And usually that comes from our parents as well, or genetic. So there's a process. The Talmud Bavli's approach to intellectual process, there are many ways to come to a conclusion. For instance, some people get an insight right in the beginning, and then they build up the case for it. They have a certain intuition. Others first build the case until you come to a conclusion. And one is not necessarily better than the other. It's different methods. I'll just give you an example for myself. I remember when I first started writing. So I remember I was spending a lot of time writing the first page of a longer essay that would take like 30, 40 pages. And I don't know how many hours I spent on the first page, maybe 20 hours. And I kept, but that time it was before the word processor, so it was a typewriter. Anybody ever saw a typewriter? Why it's so funny? You're young people. So a typewriter in the 80s, in the early 80s. And the typewriter, your first page doesn't look what you like. What you do is you pull it out of the typewriter and you crumple it up and you throw it into the garbage basket, a waste basket. So I kept throwing out the first page and I was sitting and sitting and sitting. And a senior colleague of mine, like a mentor, came in and he was a writer. He had written many years, and he says to me, I don't understand. Why is it taking you so long to write the first page? So I told him, because I'm developing all the first page is just like a nucleus of everything that's going to come later. So I'm trying to visualize it, and I don't know, I'm envisioning the whole essay, and that's first page. And he said, what? I never heard that before, like that, anything like that. I said, how do you do it? He said, I write the first page, whatever comes, as I understand it. Then I write page 2. And what happens if you come to page 5, I told him, and page 1 is, he says, so I go back and I fix it. And I realized right then that there's two methods of writing, and I see it today. It's really two legitimate methods, and I've spoken to many writers. I call it, one is called a visual type of writer, and another one's like an audio type of writer. For example, when you see a painting, first you see the whole picture, and then you break it down into details, and you describe it to someone or to yourself. When you listen to, let's say, a class, like now, first you hear the details, and then comes the big picture. So the ears build a picture piece by piece until you get the whole thing. The eyes see the whole picture and then break it down. It's like really two opposite approaches. Both have their value. Visual has the impact of seeing the whole picture. But what it does not have is the depth of understanding each detail. Whereas listening, the details are much more focused, and you can break it down into pieces and so on. So I realized that I was like a visual type of writer, where I have to visualize the whole idea before I write page 1. And he was the other type of writer, where he builds it piece by piece by piece. Frankly, I wish sometimes that I could be that way. It just doesn't work for me, because it's much harder the way I do it, because until you finish page 1. But once I finish page 1, I never go back to it again. And then the rest of the pages, I remember 20 hours I could spend on page 1, and then the rest I could do in 5 hours. I can do 40 pages, because I've already so-called developed it. Whereas in his case, and I'm not saying, in some ways, as I said, I think in some ways it's even better writing the other way. Every page is like an hour. And then he goes back and edits it and so on and so forth. All I'm really saying is that there's different methods and there are probably more that each of you use in your own way, or don't use. And going back to the story with Rab Zera, what Rab Zera was trying to do was not to forget the knowledge, the facts that he learned. He was trying to forget the method, because he was a true intellectual. And this is unheard of. People who developed a strong method in developing ideas, why would they want to change that unless you're a person that wants to truly learn a new approach? It's a new way of doing things. So all of us, if we're honest people, and you have an approach to something, and someone corrects you and says, you were wrong, many of us don't admit that as well. But let's just, for argument's sake, we admit I was wrong. Okay, I stand corrected. Here's a new here's the new facts, and therefore I come to a different conclusion. But how many people do you know that come to a correct conclusion and will say, something? I'm ready to forgo my approach because I want to learn a new approach. That's unheard of. That means that there's a lech lecha, even on the level of a healthy past, because you simply want to learn a new way to look at things. This, by the way, is one of the secrets to true and healthy love. When two adults meet each other in a healthy situation, I'm not talking about one of the partners annihilates him or herself in order to defer to the other. But if it's two adults that have an independent spirit, and they're both intelligent, so how do you resolve a problem when they have a disagreement? Especially if they're strong-willed, and each one thinks they're right. And each one thinks not only that they're right, that if you do what I do, we'll both be happier. That's ultimately what it comes down to. And the other person says exactly the same thing. So usually the answer is, listen, one person is going to defer. One person will say, listen, I love the person, so even if I don't agree, I still do it that way. But there's a deeper dimension to this. If two people truly have intelligence, they learn something, that intelligence is never static. That another person may have a different approach than you, and may even have a different conclusion, and you respect it, not just because you love them, but because it's truly possible that there's another way to look at things than you. In other words, love is an opportunity to transcend your own personality. Even your strong personality. I'm not just saying, that I'm weak in this area and my spouse is strong, so I respect her in that case. Even in the areas that you're strong in, you have a lech lecha, because you are able to get beyond the subjectivity and comfort zone of self-love, of other influences, parental and social influences, to truly experience something new. That is the true adventure of love and romance. But you need a lot of security and confidence to be able to be so vulnerable. That means you have to be ready to say, even my strengths, something. There are greater things than my strengths as well. There's another human being, and maybe she or he can teach me something I didn't know. That requires a deep comfort zone. So that's what I would say, the ultimate comfort zone. Are you comfortable enough to leave your comfort zone? Are you secure enough to leave your secure zone? That's the big challenge. And that is a rare thing to find, because, as I said, we become very trapped by our comforts, and especially if they're so-called healthy ones. So I'm not even arguing now about the lech lecha from healthy things. Obviously, we have plenty of unhealthy things to deal with. It's hard enough to leave an unhealthy home. Forget about a healthy one. But I just wanted to point out that this statement that God tells Abraham is really all-encompassing. And to go back what I began with this evening, this is the story of our lives. It's true. As I said, there was a man called Abraham, and he was told this close to 4,000 years ago, 3,800 years ago. However, it's also true that this is being told to us right now. And it was also told to people before Abraham in a spiritual dimension. Which means in each of our cases, this is a week when a certain flow of energy opens up, opportunity, a door, a window of opportunity, that all that you have in your life, and we have all been shaped either by our own subjectivity and our parents and our communities, you have an opportunity to experience a lech lecha. Does it happen cold turkey, you're suddenly like free? Or it doesn't happen? It happens first by just acknowledging what these influences are. So if you really want to be courageous, try this. Try writing down how many decisions you make and how many influences. I'm sorry, how many decisions and how many behavior mechanisms are shaped by the three influences that I just said. The personal subjective ones, the parental, and the community ones. It's not an easy exercise, let me tell you, because it means being soberly and brutally honest with yourself. To say, here are decisions I'm making, and I don't know whether this decision is really from me, or is it I've been shaped this way. And of course, there's going to be a resistance in each of us and say, why should I do this exercise anyway? Just because Rabbi Jacobson said so, So honestly, the only reason you would do it is either because you truly want to discover truth, or because you have a crisis and things aren't working. So, usually that's the reason that people have a wake-up call, when something's not working, so you start looking and saying, okay, what am I doing wrong? But if you think everything is going well in your life, which basically means you're in your comfort zone, you're obviously not getting out of it so fast. Most people who are comfortable do not make a move. That's the trap. No matter how destructive that comfort is, you don't make a move unless it becomes more undesirable to stay there. That's how it is. As they say, you need to hit rock bottom before you change something. Why? Why can't you just set your mind and say, this is not healthy? Because the bias and the self-love minimizes the problem. How many people who are truly in a troubled situation are just going to say, I'm troubled? They can't tolerate. How could I live every day knowing that I'm in such a sick situation? So your tolerance level basically goes up, and you can start tolerating things you don't even deserve to tolerate. You shouldn't never tolerate. I know people who tolerate such pain. When I heard the kind of pain people go through, it's unbelievable to me. That has become strangely their comfort zone. That's what they're used to. Remember, comfort zone doesn't always mean you're comfortable there. It just means you're most accustomed to it. Or as they say, the unknown evil is worse than the known evil. Because if I get out of this, who knows how much pain? Maybe I'll have much more pain. In that type of sense. So we numb ourselves, we medicate ourselves. There are many, many ways that we try to cultivate, or I would say perpetuate, our comfort zones. It's a very difficult topic to speak about. I'll tell you why, because to be honest, I've got my comfort zone as well. And sometimes I wonder, and before I was going to speak tonight, I thought about it. I say, what happens when I'm trapped in mine? It's extremely difficult. You become very, very convinced of things, and the distortion is very profound. So what's the trick of the trade? So I'll tell you a few tricks that I use. Being that I'm aware of it at least, what you do is you get yourself stuck in situations that don't let you be comfortable. Like, for instance, this whole move of the MLC to come to this 6th Street, frankly, if I was going to be in my comfort zone, it would have been easier not to do it. I was doing classes in the Kalbach Shul, and thank God, my ego is nurtured by many people, and so on and so forth. But you know something? I knew in my own mind what can still be achieved, and as much as I tried to so-called procrastinate and find all kinds of excuses, I said to myself, you take the plunge, you get yourself stuck, you're paying salaries to people, you can't get out of this, there are commitments here, your reputation's on the line, you need 1,000 different things, and that's it. Too bad. I'm out of the comfort zone, I can't do anything about it. But there are times, you want to just have a little respite, but then of course a new series of challenges come up. I'm not suggesting you all have to take such leaps, but I will tell you this, if you want to grow and excel, get yourself stuck in something good that gets you out of your comfort zone and you can't get back in. That's the key. Because if you get back in, you're not going anywhere. You're going to gravitate back to comfort. And I think it's not willpower is simply not enough. You have to get yourself into a commitment situation where you simply cannot get out of. Now, I know that most of us don't like to hear that, but I'm telling you that's what it comes down to. That's why I asked about commitment issues. If you got commitment issues and you like your comfort zone, those two are going to feed off each other, unfortunately, for many years. I'm not saying this as a threat or an ultimatum. We're here as friends, and everybody makes their choices in life. But this is, what I'm saying here affects our relationships, affects our personal choices. I don't think there's an area in our lives, an important area, that is not influenced by what I've discussed here this evening. Because if you think about somewhere something is going to be affected by either these three types of subjectivity, about our comfort zones and so on. So that's a little trick to trick your own need to be comfortable. Now, I will tell you, on the other end of things, I've never been as comfortable in my life as I am today. Because the true spirit is comfortable in this type of aspiration. So though, yes, we all like to come home at night and say it was a successful day and I just want to lay down and take off my shoes and relax. And I wish that upon everybody, and everyone should have that. Because we all need a time to step back and just be calm and relaxed. But the key to real comfort is not the end of the day. It's that when you know that when you're working hard and exerting yourself and you're bringing the best out of yourself, that your spirit becomes most comfortable there. And you become very, very secure human being. Because if we stay in our comfort zones, I'll tell you what you'll have. You'll have comfort, but you'll never have security, real security. You'll have a delusion. It'll be like being in your mother's womb. Your mother is protecting you. It's not your mother, it's some other delusional comfort. True security comes when a person is challenged and sees that they can excel. But it's a catch-22, because if we have fear and don't have the courage to make that move, what do? That's why I made the suggestion, get yourself stuck in something. You want a practical suggestion to that? Find somebody to learn with. But like a commitment. And make it very clear. This is an absolute commitment. If I'm not there, I want you to call me. Make a commitment. Make other type of commitments that you can't get out of. It can be financial commitments. It can be related to Torah study. It can be prayer. Things that become absolutes, that are not conditional based on the weather or your mood or other circumstantial factors. You won't believe what kind of impact that will have on your life. This class began almost 28 years ago. Okay. It began completely unplanned. It was never planned. I never knew I'd be sitting here today. I was a student, and at the time I was writing the talks of the Rebbe, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That was my main job, memorizing. And if you know Torah Meaningful Life, you'll see in the introduction I write what I was busy doing then. I was living behind library walls, working with very academic, high-level research and writing ideas that I'm discussing here, but in Hebrew and in Yiddish, in the Talmudic and the mystical language. And I got a phone call one day. It was the winter of, I think, 82. Wow, it's a long time. Before some of you were even born. Or your mother's womb or something like that, in your comfort zones. And I was about to leave mine, comfort zone, let's put it that way. And I remember I got a call from someone who says to me, someone suggested that they come speak to me. I said, how do they, it wasn't like I was around. No one knew. I did my work internally, but some people recommended that he come speak to me. He's looking for spiritual inspiration. So this guy named Sonny comes with his friend Michael, and they come to see me in Brooklyn. They come to my office. I didn't even have anything planned and prepared. They sit down. I remember it was the winter because I saw they were dressed. They came, I remember the parkas and all. And we had this conversation, spiritual inspiration. And we hit it off, basically. Coming from a very secular background, they both had no idea what Judaism was altogether. They were Jewish, but no idea what it was. They were connected to the promotion business, music industry, stuff like that. They asked, can they come back next week? It was Thursday night then, before we moved it to Wednesday. I said, fine, we come back next week. Next week. When we started, there was just a pure conversation between three people, myself and them. Everything was open to the table. We would question God's existence, the Holocaust, you name it. Hypocrisy, religious dogma, Woody Allen. Okay? And next week they bring another friend, Kenny, who then brings another friend. And slowly this turned into a weekly ritual that I was enjoying, frankly, but it was no plan. We would start sometimes 8:30, 9 o'clock at night, and would go literally sometimes till 6 o'clock in the morning. If you want to stay here tonight, we can do that as well. Sometimes till 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning. Yet clearly none of us had day jobs, if that's what you're thinking. Musicians, artists. And then the artists started bringing their lawyers, and the lawyers started bringing their accountants, and it became like this word-of-mouth thing. It was never advertised. People come. by car. Sometimes 2 people came, sometimes 1 person, sometimes 10 people, 20 people. And it just continued. And frankly, I had many reasons now. And I traveled. Sometimes you're not feeling so good. But I never stopped it. And it wasn't because it was planned. I just knew, because I was trained, you start something good, you don't stop. No idea where it was going, honestly. This literally is how the Meaningful Life Center was born. So long before I wrote Torah Meaningful Life. Because I learned so much from these people, and hopefully they learned something from me as well. It was just this open, non-judgmental conversation. Everything was on the table. Trust me. I'll share with you some ideas that will blow you away, what we discussed. Weird and wild stuff. I shared with them my spiritual experiences. They shared with me their acid trips, just to give you a little taste of stuff. Not the acid, they shared their trips with me, the story. I was never intrigued, I wasn't interested because, frankly, my spiritual experiences were far greater, I thought, than theirs. So, and bottom line is that here you're sitting here tonight. All the same word of mouth. It's people, it's a friend that knew a friend, and I could link it directly. I mean, at some point, maybe 10, 15 years after doing this, someone said, maybe we should get everybody's names so we can remind us of class. And this. I didn't even think about it. I didn't even know what a mailing list was, to be very honest. That's how sheltered I was. And then, of course, came, but once I, email today and Facebooks and internet and all that. But my point I want to make is not just to tell you the story, but everything starts from a commitment. And I didn't know where it would go, but I knew a good thing, you continue. And it was not always comfortable. It wasn't always easy. I remember one Wednesday night, it was Shavuos, it was the holiday, but the class. And a bus pulls up, not a bus, we called it the bus. But Kenny's bus, what was it called, Jeff? Yeah. And a bunch of people come, and I'm home with my family, and my little kids, all dressed up, the holiday. And in walks 5, 6 people. They come to the Wednesday night class. And they asked me, why am I so dressed up? I said, yeah, I see you people. Of course I dress up. What about every week? I said, look, I finally realized that you're such special souls. And come in, and they sit down, and they're not only enjoying a class, this time they enjoyed a full meal. And they thought the next week they're going to get the same thing, but it wasn't exactly, not getting all those blintzes and the Shavuos thing. And I talked about Shavuos. And they said, wow, it was very interesting. So I said, when is this holiday? I said, tonight. That's how consistent we remain. So I say this to all of you because it's a real lesson. There's no one here that is not able to make a move. And it doesn't have to be big. I'm not suggesting starting a whole class. Start something, but stick with it. And you'll see. That will be more powerful than your comfort zones and your subjectivity. It will help pull you out of there. But you have to stick with it. And it could be I can give you many, many ideas. If you want to speak to me personally about it, everybody has their particular situation. It could be customized to your situation. But it can be hosting something in your home once a month, once a week, maybe creating a group that does it. It's not just the gratification that you'll get from the ripple effect that we'll have. It will be something that forces you out of wherever you are right now. And I don't care how healthy your situation is always better. As they say, if good is good, is besser is besser. If good is better, not better. And if it's not so good, which is often the case, you'll move from the not good to the good, and so on. So this is my practical suggestion. A lech lecha, we should all have a lech lecha. Make a commitment this week, some lech lecha in your life. Some movement. It doesn't have to be a rebellion and call up your mother and father and say, listen, I'm cutting the umbilical cord. If you need to do that fine as well. But that's not the point. The point is to make something that's a choice that you make that's about you and you alone. It's hard to analyze really all those subjective influences in our life. Really hard on your own because you're subjective. You're obviously going to minimize and not see a lot of those impacts. It's very difficult to look at yourself and say, oh, I'm a product, this is a product of my parents, this is a product of my friends, this is a product of my own self-love. Not that simple to do. However, lech lecha doesn't only mean to look at it, it also means to make a move. That's what it comes down to. Lech lecha, make a move to you, or your move. That's what lech lecha means, your next move. So what will that next move be? Do you have the comfort, do you have the security to get out of your comfort zone? That's the big question. And if you don't, I'd be happy to help you be a little comfortable to do that. Sometimes you need a comfortable kick in the pants. And I mean that in a nice way. That means they're coming from a loving place. Find somebody that cares about you, that you can trust, and have them, give them the permission to push you. And you push them. You can't believe what kind of things can happen. Be a leader, don't be a follower. That's what it comes down to as well. A leader means someone that initiates, proactive. Not just an observant Jew that stands on the sidelines and observes, but a proactive one that makes a move. Coming from a house of a journalist, my father, the line goes like this: there are three types of people: people who make the news, people who read the news, and people who ask what happened. People who make things happen, to put it more poetic, people who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people ask what happened. Okay? So which one will you be? Jews, beginning from Abraham, were always the first. And you can do it. It doesn't mean dramatic, it doesn't have to be headlines, but it has to be something that's a significant act. And you don't have any excuse, because I'm inviting you and welcoming you. I'll give you ideas if you need some practical ones, in case you can't come up with anything creative. So, on this week of Lech Lecha, where Abraham went out of his comfort zone at age 75, mind you, not young. He had become a man of God many years already. He paid heavy prices, but he changed the world because he was able to get out beyond himself. That's how you change the world. You don't change the world by being you. Because if you're you and I'm me and everybody's yourself, then everything just stays in that orbit, in that stratosphere. It's the people that know how to get beyond themselves. It's called transcendence, that bring transcendence to the universe. The people that you know in your life that go beyond their own self-interest, beyond their own subjectivity on all three levels, are the people that lift you up and others. Look around. The people that are around you that are greedy and self-interest, they don't empower you. They drain you, basically. It's the people that are not driven by that give you strength. This is a rule. That's how it is. So ask yourself, next time you speak to people, are you draining them? Are they draining you? You don't have to necessarily ask it out loud. I know I once said this at a class, and someone told me that right there then they were texting somebody, and they text, are you draining me or not? And the interesting response they got, the person said, you've been draining me for 5 years, now I can drain you. So, and it's true. It's really, there's no really third option. It's either you're strengthening people or you're draining them. I mean, what's the third option? Neutral? Neutral is draining, basically. It's a waste of time. It's like saying that you went to a meeting, and the meeting was neither empowering nor draining. So what was it then? So, may God bless us all to get a little out of our own selves, Lech Lecha, and discover our real selves. Not the one you think you are, but the one you really are. And that comes with getting rid of some of the clutter and these distractions, these three forces in our lives. So the secret to all growth, yes, is leaving your comfort zone, as uncomfortable as that may sound. I want to wish everybody a very uncomfortable evening. I'm sorry. A very, let's call it that. I didn't want to say it that way. A very comforting evening, but the comfort that comes from knowing that there's more than what you have. And I want to announce that tomorrow night Philip will be giving his regular class at 7 p.m. here. And you could talk to him about those early years. He was here back then, as was Jeff and some others. Well, not all the way 28, but 25 years or whatever. And also that I will be here next Wednesday regularly. If you haven't left your email address with Golda Malka by the door, please do so. We send out email. We remind the topic of the class, and just as a reminder, and I write a weekly article by email as well. And just in general, any way that I or anyone from the Meaningful Life Center can be of help to you, please don't hesitate to ask. I just want to say, because a few people asked me, I do see people one-on-one. I usually do it Wednesday afternoon right here before the class, like starting late afternoon. So if you want to make an appointment, just call my office or email our secretary, and she'll take care of the details. I could add that. What else is there to announce? Anything I'm missing here? Well, small little break until next Wednesday night. Good night, everybody.